And with that, I'd like to now hand over to our moderator for this first panel discussion, Mr. Alan Lai. Now, Alan is the ASEAN and Corporate Affairs UK ASEAN Business Council UK-backed Director, Brunei Darussalam. And Alan joins us now to introduce our speakers and take us through this conversation on ASEAN ROK collaboration. Morning, Alan, over to you.
A very good morning, Miss Jenny. Thank you very much and great to be here. Korea has a very fond place in the hearts of Southeast Asia. We listen to Korean music on the radio and we drive Korean cars. Korean films and dramas are enjoyed on Korean TVs, and Korea has an increasing presence in our infrastructure. The longest bridge in Southeast Asia, which is the Sultan Haji Omar Ali Saifuddin Bridge here in Brunei, was built by a consortium that included a South Korean company. And of course, in ASEAN, we love our food, and there is a Korean restaurant in every ASEAN country. ASEAN is Korea's second largest trading partner, second investment destination, first overseas construction market, and the most preferred travel destination. Trade between ASEAN and Korea was around $153 billion in 2019. It has, of course, dropped due to the pandemic, but the target of $200 billion will one day be reached. Korea became a dialogue partner to ASEAN 30 years ago in 1991. Over 10 years ago, the ASEAN-Korea Free Trade Area came into effect, which has doubled trade. And just last week, on the 3rd of December, Korea ratified the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes all of ASEAN and 5 dialogue partners. And Korea's exports alone to RCEP countries is worth $250 billion. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to be here with you today with a stellar panel of experts from startup ecosystem developers from Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and Korea. The session aims to explore what are the opportunities for collaboration between ASEAN and Korean startups. And given the large market size of ASEAN and Korea, the robust trade and the warm relationships, how can startups benefit? We have 45 minutes and my esteemed panel have kindly agreed that we will hear a brief 3-minute opening remarks from each of them. And then we would love to hear from you, the audience, on your thoughts, comments, and questions on how ASEAN and Korean startups can collaborate and grow together. Speaker bios are available online and also will be placed in the chat box, which is where you can also place your questions and comments. And to begin, I'd like to turn to Ibu Siti Azizah, the Deputy Minister for Entrepreneurship at the Ministry of Cooperatives and SMEs, Indonesia. Ibu Siti Azizah, Indonesia has a thriving startup scene, especially in e-commerce. I was at an event where one of your many unicorns was asked, when will they venture outside Indonesia? And they replied quite oddly that they are not currently interested in other markets, as Indonesia is already so big. How can we encourage startups to venture outside their home markets?
Okay, hi, good morning, Alan. So good to see you and good morning, everybody. Sorry, okay. So actually, sorry, excuse me. Actually, under Asian Coordinating Committee on the Micro, Small Business Enterprises, you know, we has identified one of cooperation activities under this Asian ROK Startup Partnership. So if we are talking about the policy itself, so the roadmap still under discussion. And we hope that the roadmap will improve the environment that is primarily comprised of offshore investment and standardized regulation to promote the entry of companies into the market. So I think that will be the explanation on this one.
Thank you very much, Ibu Siti. I'm going to turn now to, we'll come back to Ibu Siti for more discussions as the questions and the comments come in. I'd like to turn now to Mr. Chris Kyung Lee, expert member at the Korea Institute of Startups and Entrepreneurship. Chris, according to Facebook and Bain & Co., around 70 million people in Southeast Asia became digital consumers since the pandemic began. And Korea is a leader in technology and innovation. How can we encourage startups in Korea to collaborate with ASEAN startups to tap the potential in ASEAN?
Yes, good morning, everyone. And especially Indonesia is a big market. We know that, and Korean startups and SMEs are always willing to launch into Southeast Asian market. And for example, Singapore is a kind of a market hub, so that Singapore can be a launching hub for other Southeast Asian countries. But then startups are beginning to fear that sometimes totally different business model needs to be established when go abroad. Even in Northeast countries like China, Korea, and Japan, there are totally different business models. For example, even website design is different. So, for example, in Japan, Japanese have preference for different website design. So there are some obstacles also. So I will tell you soon. Shall I continue?
Yes, yes, please, please.
Yes. For example, let's talk about the bigger startups in Korea, like e-commerce startups and delivery service. We have Coupang, Market Collie in e-commerce areas, and delivery companies like, excuse me, Baemin. But then the consumer behavior is totally different in Southeast Asian market. And for Korean startups, it is quite difficult to identify their needs and their behavior and sometimes cultures. And often startups have limited resources to launch into a bigger market. So that's what that's some the obstacles for Korean startups for the moment.
Thank you, Chris. I think the minister alluded to some of that earlier, where he talked about the importance of supporting the startups, not just with finance, but creating platforms where they can understand each other a little bit better. And I'd like to come back to this point about understanding each other, because the culture between Korea and Southeast Asia is quite different in the language as well. But I'd like to bring in our friends from Malaysia and welcome Mr. Mohammad Hazani Hassan, the Director of Technology Ventures at the Malaysian Technology Development Corporation. Hazani, the opportunities for startups are clearly there, and the Honourable Minister, Dr. Amin, in his opening keynote, mentioned the importance of support to not just start, but to grow. What kind of practical support can ecosystem builders provide to help startups with market entry into other countries, and in particular in Korea?
Thank you, Alan, and very good morning to all the participants and to esteemed colleagues on this panel. I think to answer that, I think it's a lot of broad, issues that we can brought forward, and how to really work with startup and how to bring it to and collaboration with the startups in Southeast Asia, especially, and with Korea. So I feel first thing first, I think as MTDC is a venture capital company and the one who providing the funding, one of the things that we can work together is how to collaborate in terms of interrelation venture capital investment. I think in Malaysia we start to engage with KIVC, Korean Investment Innovation and Venture Capital. This is something that we start working with, looking at the startup in Malaysia, as well as Malaysian VC looking at startup in Korea. So by doing so, we have this interchangeable collaboration with the two. The other things that how we can help, because in Malaysia also, under the government of Malaysia, I think we have two ministries looking at the early stage SMEs and startup, which is MEDAC, Ministry of Entrepreneurship Development, as well as Ministry of Science. So I think with these two, I think we can have more encouragement by working between G to G, between the Malaysian government as well as the Korean government, in terms of how we work, to bring the startup in understanding each other. And of course, this is not just between the Korea, also with all other ASEAN friends, which is Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines, Myanmar, Brunei, of course, And the third one, maybe I want to share is maybe on in terms of technology transfer. I think this is something that I think ASEAN, have to learn a lot from the Korean partners, especially at the startup area, because I think they have developed, how they change, the economy of the Korean, how Samsung become Samsung and all this Hyundai or everything, they're going all over the world. This is something that we can learn as well, in terms of technology transfer, in terms of technology collaboration. And of course, that on top of that, I think we can look at, something that I would like to suggest here. Maybe we have more that exchange of employee, between the two countries. So maybe for startup in Malaysia, get involved and have like an internship program, to stay, 1 or 2 weeks or 2 months in a Korean company. Of course, with other friends in Asia. So that is the way I see, how we can work together, because I think, we feel that, Korean is become really a good partner in terms of technology development, because I think technology is the way to go forward. And of course, the next is the market. Maybe you can learn to with the Korean startup, how they gone to all over the world. If you go to Middle East, you go to Indian subcontinent, if you go to Central Asia, you can see a lot of Korean products. That is something that ASEAN country can learn from Korea. How to expand the market. So maybe I stop there, and and then we can continue the discussion, Ellen. Thank you.
Perfect. Hazani, so many points for us to pick up later. Technology transfer from Korea, G2G collaboration. I think I'd like to spend a bit of time thrashing that out and how we develop that. And your points on inclusivity as well. I think that's so important and a core theme for Brunei's chairmanship of ASEAN this year. So thank you very much, Hazani. Mr. James Tan, Chairman of the Board of Directors of Action, Community of Entrepreneurship in Singapore, a very warm welcome. James, Singapore has the highest number of unicorns in ASEAN. Can you please tell us, what are the secrets to developing successful startups, and how can we encourage startups to look to Korea and for Korea to look to Southeast Asia?
Good morning, Ellen, and everyone on the panel and everyone in the audience. It's an honor to be invited to the ASEAN ROK Startup Festival. It's a pity that we can't be physically together, and I think that will bring a lot more of the interaction that Mr. Hazani spoke about earlier. But nonetheless, thank you very much to Brunei for hosting this session and organizing. So ACE, or Action Community for Entrepreneurship, is the national voice for startups and innovation in Singapore. We are approximately 20 years old. And the chairman or the patron has always been a minister in charge of entrepreneurship. And the board of directors, which I chair, usually industry luminaries, people who are in the ecosystem. And we have a full-time executive team who executes the initiatives that are being thought of by the board, which actually engages a lot with agencies in Singapore, such as Enterprise Singapore. Ellen mentioned the unicorns. That refers to Credit Suisse. The investment bank recently released a report that states that Southeast Asia, or ASEAN, has 35 unicorns, of which 23, 19 plus 4, 23, or more than half were actually created in the last 2 years alone. Or put it another way, there were 20 unicorns from 2013 to 2020, and then just last year alone, 19. So half of them were just created last year, and more than half if you add the last 2 years. I would say that unicorns takes time to build, it takes time to grow. And so most of these investments or unicorns had their gestation, their initial start about 10 years ago. It took that long. And most of the ones that were really created in last year and 2 years ago were really because of the influx of funding going into newer companies, those who are much younger than 10 years old, because of the excitement that the world has for the potential and possibilities of ASEAN. Alan, in his starting remarks, said that ASEAN or Southeast Asia is one of the world's fastest growing region, and it's true. So there's a lot of attention from private equity funds, and that includes venture capital funds, to look at Southeast Asia. So it's an opportunity that we really will be ours to lose if we don't tap into it. Out of those 35 unicorns, 43 of them are from Singapore, putting Singapore as in the pole position in terms of unicorn creation. Indonesia is not too far behind at 31%. And then relatively further behind will be Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Philippines, in that order. And I would say Singapore has that kind of number of unicorns primarily because we have built what we think is a good ecosystem for startups to come and build their companies here. And notice that my word is to come and build their companies here. So I know we are on a conference with Korea's involvement, so I obviously welcome Koreans and Korean startups to come and build their companies here. We are very aware that many global startups come to Singapore not because of our fantastically large market, because we don't have that, but because we are part of this fantastically large market called Southeast Asia. And so the integration that Ibu, Siti, and Alan talked about earlier is important. It is important that Southeast Asia functions as one big market that is attractive for investors everywhere. Otherwise, many of them are not just going to be interested in one Singapore or one Thailand or one Malaysia and so on and so forth. The ecosystem that I talk about really functions because of 5 what we call pillars. And these 5 are important pillars. They are namely Institute of Higher Learning, where there's a lot of commercialization of research taking place, and also talent that is graduating and want to join or start startups. The second pillar will be risk capital, the venture capital, angel investors, private equity funds that we spoke of, that are really putting their money where their mouth is to support the growth of large companies. Third will be public agencies such as what we have in this conference, DARE from Brunei and so on, that really, and KISET from Korea, that really either encourages or actually impede the growth of startup due to regulations. So ACE in our mandate also works a lot with public agencies in the formation of sandboxes or to push for regulatory changes so that new sectors can emerge. Fourth pillar will be corporates. Corporates play a very important role through their corporate venture funds, through becoming adopters of new technologies, through their proof of concept or proof of value that they pay to startups to adopt. And of course, because a small company can become a large corporate one day, like Samsung. So corporates are important. And last but not least, startups. So startups itself, obviously we champion the voice of startups. That's why we are the national voice at ACE for startups and innovation. And so we are very mindful that everything we do revolves around startups. And so all the engagement with IHL, risk capital, public agencies, and corporates all revolve around what can we do to help our startups further along. Alan, back to you.
James, thank you so much, and lots for us to pick up on. I'd like to come back to you a bit later on your Institute of Higher Learning and the education aspect, because the Minister mentioned the importance of education in his keynote. But before we do, I'd like to next move to Ms. Sansanee Huabsombooon, the Director of Business Innovation Center at the National Science and Technology Development Agency in Thailand. Kun Sansanee, welcome. Collaboration at any level requires people-to-people skills and networking. The pandemic, on the one hand, has prevented us from exploring other countries, but on the other hand, we can meet virtually more conveniently as we are today. The Honourable Minister mentioned earlier the importance of networking for startups. How can government agencies encourage startups to look to Korea to do business when travel is very difficult? And when travel does open back up, what advice can you give to startups looking to do business abroad? How important is networking and relationship building?
Thank you, Alan. And good morning, everyone, and Sawadee ka. it seems your questions give me an hours for answer of your questions, because it's a very, very big issue, and it's a very good topics. So NASA is a government agency, and then 70% of NASA, we have the 4 National Research Center, and this year we just set up energy as a National Research Center. And after COVID pandemic, I think every country realized that technology and innovation is very important to help us to overcome, especially in the VUCA world. So I think in the roles of government in this time, private sector or even startups need a very, very good support from government. In Thailand, we are not only encourage technology and innovation, so we kind of adjust our financial structure to support somebody who get hard time in their business. And then for financial department of Thailand, we give some financial mechanism to helping them to make the startup or SME can be survive. As you know that if talking about Thailand, most of you will thinking about tourism. So over 2 to 3 years, it's very hard time for foreigner to come to Thailand. Before a startup they do you can deposit your luggage to the airport, and then this startup grow very, very fast. But over 2 years, how about them? A lot of startup in Thailand, they're doing a business about tourism value chain. But now government can help them to, we have incubation program to help them to adjust the business model into the VUCA world, to adjust themselves and business. And also, as I said, that technology and innovation is very important. But some area of Thailand, we are not familiar how to do a digital transformation. Before, we are familiar with the sell products by the big events or go to booth, sometimes. But right now we have a program from government to support to upskill, reskill people to make themselves can adjustable to this kind of world, that make them familiar to using the digital tools to make the business survive. And also the individual or civilian can they are more happy in this kind of duration. And within NSTDA, we are not just have a National Research Center, but we have one center we call Technology Commercialization Center. So this center, we connect between demand side from business to supply side, that is startup. So it's not easy for SME or big corporate to know what is the new technology or innovation or the technology, how to using it. But startup, they are very quick learning. They grow up with the technology and innovation. So we can see this is a good complement that we inject, we matching, or we make a networking between the startup and corporate. So in NSTDA, we work with corporate for 2 years already to do open innovation. That means big corporate, they still have R&D team inside big corporate, but why not we arrange a virtual pitching, and big corporate can shopping startup products that fit to their business, or even they have a lot of partner and customer. So they can partner with the startup, and startup can helping the big corporate long-lasting business. And also startup will get from this networking, startup can get the partnership or market from big corporate, or also the mentorship, and sometimes their joint venture. So I think government can do this role very well, because we are like a middleman, and sometimes the big market, I think every country it's a government. So government can, in Thailand, we do some innovation list. If startup listed in innovation list, so government can make a purchasing to the startup, not just a big company. So this is something that I think within this kind of situation, government have many roles to help a country to grow, also help business to survive, and help startup to get more opportunities.
And Sansanee, thank you so much for that. And lots again for us to come back to, especially on the area of collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can invite you to start putting in your questions and comments in the chat function. We've got some coming through from Earl Valencia. I'm going to turn to Chris and then to Ibu Siti to respond to this. But also I'd like you both to talk about the importance of government-to-government collaboration, which was mentioned earlier by a number of the panel. How can we collaborate a little bit better to help startups on the government-to-government level in terms of a framework? And then out of that framework, perhaps responding to Earl Valencia's question, which is how can ASEAN countries work together so there is an easy flow of talent and capital so that we can truly build more regional unicorns? The issue of moving, so he cites an example of how a Filipino could easily work in Vietnam or an Indonesian to work in Singapore, so that we can create greater freedom of movement with regards to talent and skills. Chris, over to you first. How can governments work together to collaborate and create the framework, and then responses from Ibu Siti and your thoughts on the comment as well.
Okay, thank you, Alan. I think this ASEAN ROK collaborative function is very important. Since startups are lack of information, especially on market information, which is not the written documents, but vivid in field market information. So as a government agency, KISAT can help Southeast Asian startups who are interested in Korean market. And also, as Mr. Hazani and Ms. Sansanee said, the agency can work as what I call matchmaker, so that startups need information. And secondly, startups need partners, but that partners must be in trust. So if government agencies, the participants of this meeting can collaborate first and share information of startups who wants to go whatever country, then we can have a kind of a platform. So maybe we can develop that into online platform also. And third one is that startups needs to experience other markets with partnering other startups or other government agencies, and to encourage and boost Korean startups to go into Southeast Asian market. This collaborative function is very important. And also for Korean side, I think there are various channels that Southeast Asian startups or employees can come to Korea. For example, we have a startup visa, which is D-4-8. So if a foreigner meets certain criteria, he or she can acquire the startup visa and stay in Korea to have business what they like. And KISAT now has over at least 20,000 Korean startup database. So we can use that to match or some like in Korea now, experienced developers are very lacking. So if some developers can come to Korea to join Korean startups. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Well, that's fantastic. And Chris, how can like the ASEAN startups that are listening to this at the moment, how do they find out about the database or get in touch with KISS, for example? Where is the source of this information? I mean, is it, for example, on this website, the ASEAN ROK website? Where do they go to get this details?
Actually, our website, the database is because of the individual information protection. So I think we need to have a working group so that we cannot open the database, but we can recommend, or we look for the suitable startups who hope for collaborations. So for the moment, I think we need to do it a little bit manually with our database, because we cannot give or open the database. So we need some more close collaboration between government agencies in the fields of research and development, investment, and startup support. Already we have 11 programs, and KISS and KVIC, Korea Venture Investment Company, are running the program, but we need some more from R&D side and also the market side. So I suggest that we have a working group to discuss further. And also for this Asian ROK collaborations unit, we need to talk more often and discuss to find ways to help startups.
Thank you, Chris. All very good points. And again, the point of collaboration and perhaps this working group could come up with docking points for startups to come into. Ibu Siti, Indonesia is a vibrant market, and lots of people from around ASEAN and Korea looking to get into Indonesia. How can policymakers facilitate this? Do you think an ASEAN visa of the kind that Chris mentioned for startups to move around the region is viable?
Okay, thanks, Alan. So as mentioned before that, we are currently, making the policy roadmap. So it's definitely possible, and actually we are now looking for a lot of, expertise from other countries, as well as one is Korea, definitely. And we all know that Indonesia is a big market, and we had a lot of startups, but unfortunately we don't have the detail right now. But we know that we have 5 unicorns. So, but we have a lot of small startups currently developed. So as we know that we are currently working as well with the some of the competition, like BMCs, Equaton, and we find the excellent startup to be developed. So that one, and we know that we can learn a lot from Korea on the technology, innovations, and so on. So on that part, we can also work together. So as a company, here we are encouraged a lot of startup to develop, to start their business. And we in the government, we have some activities, programs, and also regulation to encourage also the millennials and the young generation to open their new companies or startup. So I think on that part, we are very open for the, the work with the other government, and we are looking for it.
Thank you very much, Ibu Siti. We've got a question coming in from Surida Sulaiman asking, could the panelists share how your respective countries can ensure that sustainability is viable to secure the startups, or I guess how to make sure startups are sustainable and how they can move forward? So the point that the minister was making earlier, not just to start, but to grow, that they can create, not compete, not just nationally, but also regionally. If I can turn to James first, you've mentioned some of these pillars. that you put into your ecosystem, and then come to Hazani and Sansanee for your thoughts. But James, how do you get your startups to come into Singapore and then compete regionally? And if you could touch on the point of education as well, please.
Okay. Thank you, Alan, for the question, and Surita also for the question. I believe she meant, or he meant, in the not just from the viability of the startup, but also in the environmental sustainability. I may be reading it wrong, but that's how I read her original question. But nonetheless, we do highly encourage startups to lend here through a mix of soft lending programs, for example, that many of us in the panel has alluded to. We have programs to help foreign startups land in Singapore, to get them exposed to what we call an Asia 101. Because we know that every country is different. There's just no way they can experience the entirety of Southeast Asia through one country, no matter how big or how small that country is. So we expose them, and then they realize whether their product is suitable or not suitable at all. Because just as important it is for every one of us to help good startups, it is also important to triage. Just like startup, we tell them, focus on what to do, right? So we focus on those that really think that this region is meaningful for them. So for Korean startups, if you come over to Southeast Asia and you can soft lend through the BIC in Thailand, for example, or ACE in Singapore, and if you realize that your product is just not suitable, then it's not suitable. But if it is suitable, then we have a whole suite of programs, and that includes, for example, hiring at a very reasonable price salary interns from the local universities, whom you can, of course, hire later on as full-timers when they graduate. There are grants also for you to tap onto if you choose to go into certain sectors. For example, in the area of environmental sustainability, there are government schemes that, as long as a certain percentage is owned by a Singaporean team and so on, you can tap into a lot of these grants. And if you fail to tap into these grants, then there are 200 or so investors in the risk capital pillar. They are angel investors, seed capital, and so on, that they can tap into. So I'll say that the whole ecosystem is important, and that is why we advocate and continue to advocate the importance of not just growing the private equity pie or growing number of startups or any of those, but as a whole. All of them, all the pillars are important. So just on the IHL itself, Alan, on IHLs, we have two approaches when we work with IHLs. One is on the talent piece, where we understand that no longer do everyone wants to go to work for a big bank or work for a large corporate. And we want to make sure that we hasten their path, or at least smoothen the path for them to start something. And they get a lot of exposure in this during the course of their degree. And then when they come out, they are probably already exposed enough that they can jump into it and start something. There's also another approach that we have, which working with the research institutes in all these IHLs. The research institutes are the place where a lot of research is being generated, and the commercialization of those research is an important thing for us. Otherwise, they're just sitting on the shelf. And so whether they are from an IHL that's local or IHL that's foreign, we are open to working with all the research institutes as long as the research can be meaningfully commercialized. Alan, back to you.
Thank you very much, James. We've got about 7 minutes left before we need to wrap up. I'm getting pinged by the organizers to make sure we have a hard stop at the hour. Hazani, your thoughts, please, on, again, the collaboration aspect. You talked a little bit earlier about funding. How can you help startups with funding going outside of Malaysia, for example? You're on mute, Hazani.
Okay, all right. Actually, okay.
Okay, Hazani, you're on mute. Sorry, Sansanee. Oh, hold on.
Oh, thank you, Alan. Yeah, okay. I think this is a lot that can be done into funding. I think one of the biggest obstacle for startup is looking for funding, because from the ideation stage, to all the way to commercialization. There's a lot of, if you're talking about technology readiness level, from TRL 1 all the way to 9, So we have to have this continuous support and funding, because at the early stage, of course, I mean, what government can do really, I mean, especially in Malaysia, we start up with, I mean, we provide grants. Then from that, proof of concept, we start more, I mean, combination of grant and some kind of a soft loan kind of thing. Then later, when we go to commercialization, we start with equity, I mean, preference shares and so on. So what we have to make sure right now, there is always continuous continuum of funding from TRL 1 all the way to 9, and of course from that they go to startup stage, they go to expansion stage, then they go, of course, mezzanine. So I think this is something that, I mean, we, in terms of working collaborative with other funding agencies in ASEAN as well if with Korea, I think that's very important, because the other things, I mean, when any agency in Malaysia, for example, looking at startup, maybe we have one kind of scope only looking at that. But if we can bring, the other investor from Singapore, from Philippines, from Korea, and we can help, to enrich the idea. And on top of that, do whatever this startup, I mean, for example, venture capital, they don't just give money, but this is what happened after they give money. They really work with them, how to grow the market, how to grow the technology, and how you find partners, and this is where the Asian countries and startup can work together, because by working together, you can expand the market, expand the knowledge of the technology. And I think at the same time, tap into other assistance by for example, Singapore have a lot of assistance, Korea have a lot of assistance that we can work with. So that is maybe how we will look at the continual funding, that we can work together through a collaboration among the countries, so we can share all those input and data.
Cross-agency collaboration. I like that. Thank you very much, Hazani. Sansanee, your final thoughts, please. A quick fire. I'm going to do a very quick fire round to invite the panelists to give their final thoughts. I'm afraid we're running out of time, but your one advice from a policy perspective to get ASEAN and Korea ecosystem builders to work together. Hazani mentioned the importance of cross-agency funding. From your perspective, what would you suggest?
I think it's a lot of things to do, but we have to prioritize what we should do in the first. I see that each country have an ecosystem, startup ecosystem, but why not we do like ASEAN ecosystem? Because each country, like Brunei, maybe you have a lot of fun. So you may strengthen with that point, and Korea, you are really grow very quick and high technology, and Thailand is very welcome for doing some technology localization. So I think if we can do like ASEAN ecosystem and we draw up some strength for each country and doing this ecosystem for startup, I think this will be good, and we can do the drafting the ecosystem within Asian country, because like online, because if you're talking about we cannot fly to each other, but preparation is very important. For example, I have set up company in Korea, so a lot of things that we have to help them, like educate, rule and regulation in each country. Culture is also very important. Strategic partner that may interested in your products is very, very important, or even market research. So everything of this, we can help, government can help, or government can link up with accelerator or incubator, and we can do this. So I think if we start to do like an Asian startup ecosystem, Thailand is one of the welcome to join this project with Korea and the other country. Thank you.
Thank you, Sansanee. That's fantastic. Ibu Siti, final thoughts on how to collaborate as a region with Korea? We've got funding and we've got an inter-ecosystem agency collaboration.
Okay, I think I agree with Ms. Sansanee that we need to develop the ecosystem of each country. And we also look at the funding is one of the most important thing for a startup. And if we talk about Indonesia, currently we have a lot of startup which is, they need to develop their own company to start running and, marketing their product, as well as, preparing the financial for growth. So I think I agree with all the panelists on this one. And we have to look back on each country's uniqueness and what we can, what we have, what we can do. And then, of course, we can work with Korea on the innovation and technology. So I think that one.
Thank you very much, Ibu Siti. That's fantastic. I'm going to come to James and then Chris for your final words. James, please say your final thought.
We welcome all kinds of collaboration. Strongly agree with the encouraging a lot more collaborations happening across borders. Brunei can take the lead since Brunei is currently chairing ASEAN, and we look forward to supporting Brunei. But regardless of, it's not a one-year thing. This is a multi-year journey. So regardless of who's chairing ASEAN or ASEAN ROK Festival, for example, Singapore remains very welcoming to startups and ecosystem players who want to move the region forward.
Thank you very much, James. And Chris, your final thoughts, please. How can we, you mentioned the working group earlier, and you seem to have a lot of support for that idea.
Yes, I'll be brief, and practically, I suggest again that we panelists can exchange some demands from startups and also from investors' side. And there are some cases already which has collaborations among Southeast Asian startups and Korean startups or investors with startups. So if we can share that and we try to develop into a matchmaker, then I think we will have a very successful cases in the future.
Thank you so much to Chris, Ibu Siti, Hazani, James, and Sansanee. Thank you so much for joining me for what has been a fascinating learning adventure on how to work together. I've learned a lot about the importance of collaboration, the opportunities we have with technology adoption and collaboration, but certainly this working group, this inter-agency to create an ASEAN ecosystem for agency collaboration seems something to build on for Brunei and perhaps for Cambodia to pick up as they chair ASEAN coming into 2022. So on behalf of my panel, thank you so much, and on behalf of the audience, thank you very much for joining me. And with that, I'll pass you back to the very capable hands of Jenny Malayali.